Before this video starts, I just want to give a massive shout out to all my channel members. If you want to receive a shout out, then become a channel member today and you'll be shown on screen like all these other channel members here. Anyways, enjoy the video. Some time ago, I asked you guys in a community post to give me some more of your Battle Cats hot takes. For some of you guys who put multiple hot takes, I'm only going to give my responses to any of the ones I have any input on, because for some of them, I don't really have any opinion on them and I want to save some time on my end. If you enjoyed me reading some Battle Cats hot takes, then why not give this video a like and leave a comment down below about your Battle Cats hot takes. Also, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel as this helps me out in the long run and lets me know that this is the sort of content you guys enjoy. Anyways, let's read some more Battle Cats hot takes. Everyone wants Uncanny Quest, but I have a feeling that if it were to come out, the fans would be up in arms. The idea of an Uncanny Quest would be pretty interesting. However, if they wanted it to work, they would have to make losing a level a lot less punishing than losing a level in Legend Quest, because a lot of stages in Uncanny Legends require specific units. The best way they could do it is by making it so that an attempt on a level will always cost 1 star or crown, but knowing Ponos, they probably wouldn't do that. Luga is underrated in both of his forms. He has extremely high pushing power in his second form, and an amazing peon clear in his third form. I just wish he was given a little more credit compared to the rest of the Lugas. Luga I find as a unit is a bit tricky to use because of their rather long force swing. Their second form for most levels only really works on levels that you can cheese, Cat God style, and their third form is only really good for clearing metal peons due to their rather low damage. Like I said earlier, the long force swing makes it kind of hard to use. Garu is actually a very good and underrated cat, but is outshined by the other Uberfest units. He tanks extreme amounts of damage and deals a surprisingly amount as well. His only 2 downsides, to be honest, is his sluggish move speed, but since he's a tank, it's okay, and cursed, but that still leaves tons of stages that he could destroy. Garu as a unit is a pretty good tank against most enemies, having nearly 600,000 health against everything outside of traitless if they aren't cursed at level 30. Their Z-Killer allows them to take out zombies that end up getting caught in his hitbox. While they only deal 47,000 damage, including the mini-wave, but thanks to said mini-wave, they have an effective 7,642 DPS. However, Garu's general perception as a unit I find is a lot worse than usual because Garu is competing with some of the best units in the game. If you were to throw Garu into any other set, there's a good chance they could be a top 3 unit in the majority of the sets. To use another video game to explain how I feel about Garu, I imagine Garu being the Zetsubo no Shima of the Uberfest units. While Zetsubo is still a great zombies map, the other competition it faces in Black Ops 3 is literally nothing but some of the best maps in all of the COD Zombies franchise. Hope that makes sense as to how I feel about Garu. I personally think Coppermine and her variants are good. I happen to have all 3 of her variants and I find her range and uptime really good. Her cooldown is decently fast and she works well as support with other crowd controllers. Seabreeze Coppermine can outrange all common metals, Holy Coppermine works well with Juliet vs St. Dober, and Base Coppermine has even more range than Sanzo with 75% freeze for a long time. Now with Ultra Talent TBA reduction and Zombie Target, she gains even more usage. Coppermine I find is a unit which is good as additional crowd control, but on her own, the 75% freeze rate makes her just a bit wonky to use. Now I want to point out a comment that Solomon Tomcat made about Coppermine's combo with the basic cat. While for the early and mid game, this is an amazing combo, but in the late game, I don't find it works as well because immediate crowd control becomes a little bit more important at that part of the game, and she may sometimes struggle to land a hit due to her somewhat long force swing of almost 3.5 seconds. Though her ultra talents I think do help give Coppermine a legit spot in the floating crowd control scene late game due to her lack of TBA if you get the ultra talent to level 5, because it stops getting better after level 5 for some reason, and Mini Surge can help push the freeze time for longer, and maybe hit a backline or floating enemy. Though her zombie crowd control isn't something I would personally use, mainly due to the fact that she lacks Z-Kill. Mitama is still good in late game, sure, curse, but that could be worked around, especially if you use the new curse base upgrade from like 12.2. Plus, not all stages are relic oriented, so she can still work like normal in a lot of late game stages. I think I may have talked about a similar thing in one of my previous hot takes videos, but I suppose it wouldn't hurt to really bring it up again. The only relic enemies that can counter her are things like Loris, who have LD. The thing with an enemy like Loris is that you usually want a different strategy to deal with them. Mitama is still an amazing unit in a ton of stages, especially if you can afford to run a slow combo. Here's quite possibly my hottest take that takes a bit of theory crafting to understand. Elemental Pixies are the worst set in the game. Here's why. The set is directed at countering Cats of the Cosmos, where a lot of units in the set only counter alien. Some have other targets, though for the majority, they counter only aliens. Cats of the Cosmos isn't particularly difficult apart from the few stages unless you know what you are doing, and the amount of hard alien stages in the rest of the game you get Pixie value from is essentially limited to Puffer Planet and only a few more stages. Note that stages like Raise Your Torches, Chapel Transfer, and alike are genuinely really easy to do no Uber. Air, Bliza, and Yami all have undesirable performance against aliens. The novelty of Yami's wave block is also quite overrated. You'll still do just about everything good enough with just Octo. Misley is a unit that, while not bad at crowd controlling aliens, is never going to really mean the difference between winning and losing a level unless you're missing Seafarer. This leaves Bora, Volta, Gravi, and Lumina, the first two who are strictly anti-alien specialists that don't even have the novelty of sniping backliners, Gravi, who's actually pretty good, and Lumina, who is the best of the set but is the legend rare and very hard to obtain. Even the other bottom tier sets like the Lugas and Dragon Emperors have an X factor that you can roll that are very powerful units like Luffalan and Daliazin. Pixies don't have this. Not to mention that the Luga set in general is filled with underrated gems. Dragon Emperors is still pretty bad though. Dark Heroes is a much stronger set for pushing early to mid game with almost all of the benefits. All units there target alien and perform at least decently while having other forms that target traits to expand the specialist coverage. Even the worst of Dark Heroes, like Cyclops, can still net you more value than something as useless as Air. I know that the Dark Heroes don't have Warp Blocker, but this isn't really needed because most of them are backliner units that actually are fine with being warped, extra chances to reposition. Rolling Elemental Pixies is the key set to beating aliens, not even always though, and then losing to everything else. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Now this one was a very interesting read, and there are a few things I want to address. The Elemental Pixies are definitely the most specialized set in the game, with only 2 Ubers who target any other trait outside of Alien. This does make it an awkward set to roll if you want just a decent attacker or already have good anti-aliens, because most of the units here are specialized for dealing with only aliens. Gravi I would say is the one where you can get the most generalist value of because of the fact that they have a relatively high base health and their wave can help with piercing into the backline as well as serving as a good wall in wave stages due to their wave immunity. However, I would have to disagree about Yami's wave block being overrated. Being able to have that insurance policy in case an octopus dies is way too good to not have for a wave stage. This is also because of the fact that all the relevant wave enemies have a much shorter range than Yami. Though outside of these 2 units, the specialization of the set does come at a huge cost of, well, I can handle aliens fine enough, so I don't really need to roll the set at all. The Lugas and Dragon Emperors still have units that shine, like Luffalan, Assassinland, and Daliazin, like you mentioned. I can also agree that Dark Heroes is a much better set to roll for more generalist-based units, because most units do have another target or multiple targets for each form. War God Hanzo is one of the most underrated Ubers in the entire game. I'd say better floating crowd control than Kai, Catman, and Windy. The small yet guaranteed freeze really makes a huge difference when attacking floating and black enemies since his attack rate is fast. Sadly, he's kinda bad against Colossus, but that doesn't stop the fact that Hanzo makes floating and black stages a cakewalk. For a unit that hasn't reached its full potential with the lack of talents in true form, he's incredibly strong. Now Slapsticks is the most overrated super rare, end of story, and Cyborg Cat over Slapsticks. Even with Strong against relics, I simply prefer using Cyborg Cat, Macho Legs, or Dragon Cat. It's so overtalked and the only moment where I needed them was when I was trying to get Crazed Whale. People will counter that he's cost efficient compared to Cyborg, but were there any memorable stages where that was a huge deal? Alright, now for the first take, I'd say Hanzo is a decent unit and I found it to be kinda useful, but the uptime is too short for how I would like it. I'd try to treat the freeze more as a bonus than anything. For that second point, however, I'd have to disagree, probably some of the biggest disagreement I would ever have. Slapstick's role in Uncanny Legends is so integral for making tons of relic stages much easier. 355 range gives it an extra tiny bit of safety compared to Cyborg. Plus, thanks to their strong ability, they're pretty tanky against relics, especially if you get the weaken talent. If you have a few Slapsticks on the field, they could easily weaken a strong relic enemy like Emost, and also give them over an effect of 100,000 health against relics at level 50. Cyborg's stats are too low to really work properly for the endgame, and I only really tend to use Cyborg for levels that feature toxic enemies because it's still a nice niche on a unit, especially for a non-Uber unit. Iwaltz is better than Juvens, and Musashi is not bad, just overlooked. I don't have anything really to say about the Merc Storia take, but I have something to say about the Musashi take. The main issue with Musashi is that their niche has been taken over by other units, most importantly, Dancer Cat. Back when Musashi was first released, he was a key unit for no uber wave stage strats because he was unique in that factor, but as I said, his niche has been taken over by other, more easy to use units. If you want a more in-depth look at the dilemma Musashi sits in, then check out my video that goes into detail about Battle Cat's power creep. Corrupted Psycho Cat is absolute garbage. He gets crushed by most alien enemies, and slow isn't a great crowd control as enemies can still attack him. No idea why people like him so much. Well, if you can keep your Psycho Cat guarded, then he will absolutely be an amazing crowd controller. 365 range is extremely high for a non-uber crowd controller, and since they have a really fast attack rate with a rather long slow time, you can easily grind enemies to a halt. Pair it with Seafarer and there's a good chance that the alien won't be moving for the rest of the level. In my opinion, Little Valkyrie isn't actually a bad rusher unit despite her lack of good knockback. In certain situations, she could be insanely useful thanks to her immunities. At level 50, she has a very high DPS and can tank a heavy hit. Her short cooldown also makes up for it. Her unusual range may seem bad for a rusher unit, but it actually improves her survivability. Her main downfall is that she can clip into enemies when they get knocked back. In short, she is a very good rusher. Little Valkyrie is definitely a great rusher. 78,000 damage with 18k DPS at level 50 is nothing to scoff at. Plus, her immunities make it easier to slot into lineups where you need these sorts of things. Plus, I have found that her Z-Killer can come in handy for when you lack options. I'm saying this as she was one of the first Ubers on my main save, but her main issue is the lack of knockbacks that truly allow most Uber rushers to land more hits, but this is somewhat made up by the fact that she has a rather high standing range for a rusher. Ramen is very overrated as a generalist meat shield. You need multiple slots of research combos to use him effectively. It doesn't help that the best research combos all contain Ubers, like cheating hearts and bad guys, and even at that point you might as well use dual erasers plus Mohawk or Jianshi instead of just Ramen. Additionally, Ramen costs a lot to spam since using him on his own would be a fool's errand. Now, do I think Ramen is bad generally? No, I just think he's overrated. But to use Ramen generally will require a lot of plus levels to cover the weaknesses I've mentioned above. Honestly, Ramen I find really only needs one research small to work well enough, as this reduces their cooldown to 3 seconds flat. The thing with Ramen is that due to their slow speed, they will be more huddled together compared to something like the Manic Shields or Jianshi, so it isn't as noticeable. Also, Ramen has a shockingly high amount of DPS for a meat shield unit, even at level 50, having almost 6,000 DPS if you invest in attack talents. If your Ramen can make it to an enemy, that's a decent chip put onto them, especially thanks to their pretty good health stat, but I usually run dual erasers and Magic Mohawk as my main meat shields. Even at level 50, Cameraman is mid. She isn't a good generalist, and her matchup against floating is only okay. The thing that makes Cameraman great is her stackability. Because of her rather low speed stat and decent range, if you can keep the enemies from pushing too hard, she will accumulate into a large stack quickly. Plus, her survivability is really great because of her survivability, especially if you talented it, as it will always give her a chance to reposition. Both of the Is variants are kinda trash. I only got the Epic Fest, but I believe that the Uberfest is the same way. Let me explain. I find that they die way too quickly and don't have that much of an impact. Their cooldown is too long for a suicide unit. I've boosted Epic Fest 1, but still has minimal effect. I only have Dark Is, but it sounds like you're probably not using them to their full potential. They're an amazing unit that can get out into the field, secure a few big hits, then going out, but their 300 range and decent health can allow them to stay alive for a little while. Their 52-second cooldown is short enough to where I can usually get a second one out by the time the first one dies. Growing Epic is not really talked about, at least from what I've seen, despite the fact that Growing Epic is way worse than any other Catfruit stage. People talk about Growing Strange way more, but Growing Strange isn't that hard. All you need to do for Growing Strange is to bring a good loadout with units combating as many traits as possible, which isn't all that hard to do. Growing Epic, however, even though the first stage is easy, the second stage is more difficult than you would expect, and there's only a 40% chance of the stage appearing. The fact that there is a 40% chance of the stage appearing is absolutely mad, as you aren't even guaranteed to beat the stage, because the stage actually has a fair amount of difficulty. Growing Epic is the worst Catfruit stage IMO. Now, I don't know what you're on about saying Growing Epic is harder than Growing Strange, because I never really had any difficulty with Growing Epic, but the real struggle was just hoping you get the continuation stage, because at least with Growing Strange, you were always able to get the next stage, but Growing Epic's 40% chance continuation chance does not feel like a 40% chance. Now, for the last hot take of the video. Phono and Balrog are both better than Dark Casley. They are 100% better in late to end game, and IMO on par in earlier stages. When both Phono and Dazzly are at level 60, they have 21 and 22k DPS against most traits respectively. Although Dazzly has a slight advantage against Aku and Relic and an overwhelming advantage against Traitless, Phono has 1.5 times her range. Additionally, many new enemies are surge immune, so Dazzly's power is reduced against them, similar to Phono's damage against Traitless. Even more than surge immune, there now exists Surge Mirror, which makes Dazzly a hindrance to the majority of your units. Whereas Dazzly deals heavy damage in a wide area against multiple targets, Balrog does unforgivable damage at point blank range to a very unlucky foe. Balrog has a few drawbacks, including his lack of area attack and range, and in some cases, too little endurance. However, someone who plays Balrog to his full skill cap rarely experiences any of this. The issue of area attack doesn't actually serve as an issue most of the time. Many late stages are filled with a few strong enemies rather than hordes of weaker ones. Regarding range, you can use meat shields and crowd control to prevent enemies from having their way with him. And for endurance, we are provided with many ways to improve it. These include talents, talent orbs, boosting, cat combos, cannon bases, and even the cannon itself. Thunderbolt is a Balrog user's best friend, as it can essentially guarantee a free Balrog strengthen hit. Balrog is a unit that no unit can compare to, whereas Dazzly can theoretically be replaced by niche specialists and substituted for just slightly weaker generalists. Meta slaves, now's your chance to think freely. Dazzly's reign of dominance is over. Now regarding the point about Phono, I feel that the strengths of Phono and Dazzly were at a similar point of strength, to the point where I couldn't really choose a number one spot between the two. However, with the introduction of Surge Mirror, I find the scale has tipped towards Phono being the better of the two, as unless you want to run a lineup of Surge Immunes, it is ill-advised to bring Surge units into a level with the Surge Mirror enemy. For Balrog, I find that Balrog is still under Dazzly just because it takes less effort to use Dazzly compared to Balrog. Generally, when it comes to how I would rank a unit in terms of who is the best, part of it involves just how much effort it takes to use the unit. For Dazzly, she can usually just wreck house on her own without much support. Balrog, on the other hand, does need that extra support like the Thunderbolt cannon and such. So, there were some Battle Cats hot takes that my lovely audience has provided, and I gave my thoughts on some of these hot takes. Have a hot take of your own? Why not leave it in the comments down below, and make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, as this shows me that this is the type of content that is interesting to you. Also, shout out to the following channel members: Carlos Solitaros, Not Skelly, Vertigooey, and the Prodigy Rex. If you want to receive a shout out at the end of these videos, then become a channel member today. With that said, I hope you have a wonderful day.